Good morning, welcome. Thank you guys for coming to Breakthrough to Excellence. I am Melanie Burke. I am a Maristem employee. I work in Central Indiana. This is Ed Corrigan. He is a key partner of ours out of Illinois. So Ed is out of the Brant Research Group. So key into micronutrients and foliars and really way smarter than I am today. So any questions will be defaulted to this guy.
Yep, be looking forward to a lot of conversations. Kind of curious if you guys have any specific problems this year with nutrition or some of the growth of corn, and sometimes that can help key in. You know, I always look whenever I'm driving down the highway at, you know, typically 70 or sometimes 80, and I start to, you know, see different little things in the fields. Visually, and I started to see now sulfur deficiency at the top leaves. That's where we always look for it. So if you look at these top corn plants, you can automatically tell if it's sulfur deficient because that's where that S deficiency shows up, and it's not like nitrogen. Nitrogen always shows at the bottom, right? So it's one of the things that's characteristic that you can see going down the highway, and I'm just starting to see it, but it's not near as severe as most years. I don't know if you guys have had much. Everything's perfect this year. That's kind of what I'm hearing out there. And a lot of the tissue tests I'm getting from other states, the best that I've ever seen. So big crop, big crop.
So if you guys aren't calling out specifics for us to talk about, we're gonna get started and talk about a high yield corn program. And so within this approach, we not only want to look at nutritional needs, but how do we get those nutritional needs fulfilled? And then how do we drive even beyond what most people would call your normal high yield program? So how do we extend that? How do we look at late season differently than what we historically have in the past? Again, we're going to focus on corn here. You'll have a chance to talk soybeans in another tent. So we'll kick it off with, Ed, really when we start to think about the corn season, preparing for planting and thinking about your soil biome. So really looking at your soil conditions, better understanding those conditions. One thing as we drive into this marketplace and really talk about biology and think about biology, we're looking at what biology exists in your soil. How many of you have done a biology evaluation test on your soil? Okay, so that's where the future's going. And so when we think about that, really driving to a bacterial to fungal ratio of a 1-to-1 ratio is what's going to help you long term and really consider doing more bushels for less. And so once you get that soil corrected and get to that 1-to-1 fungal to bacterial ratio is when we can drive bigger. So to help us get there, Ed, excavator being a key player, so prepping that soil.
Yeah, so this is something very unique with this season, and we just talked about we've got a really big crop. So we're going to pull up a huge amount of tonnage, and I've seen this before. This ain't my first year farming and being around farming, and this crop, it reminds me exactly of 2004. 2004, we planted early, had a perfect emergence. Everything nutritional was high off the charts with tissue tests. And so what we found is we really had a very slow harvest because of all the yield, number one. Number two, it also had sucked up a lot of this nutrition. So we've got to figure out a way to get that back in, because it actually in 2005 started to, on our corn fields, really minimized our yields. So this residue breakdown is going to be key after this crop, more so than a short crop, okay? So short crops tend to really and if it's a wetter fall, which this looks like the impact is going to be like 2004, a little wet, taking it out, we'll be in much more dire issues. And that this allelopathic or toxin, autotoxicity that comes out of the corn stalk that doesn't deteriorate quickly, you know, and the later we harvest, that doesn't have an opportunity to happen, especially the late harvest. So all this kind of falls back into how do we digest this crop as quick as we possibly can. And we didn't have a product in 2004 like this. We were using some ammonium sulfate. That was one of the key ways that we sped it up. by helping to feed it, but this is actually the biology that'll actually just tear it down very quickly. That spore technology is fantastic, and some of the data. So we're really excited about trying to utilize that to devour that crop, get this nutrition, and get it ready for next year's crop. And that's going to set us up. You know, it's like playing a game of pool. You want to set yourself up when you make this shot and make it. You want to be ready for the next shot. This is the next shot.
So those of you that have been using excavator, I think we've had some key learning components over the last couple years. And so one thing that I've learned is if you spray excavator right after the combine, you have a lot of moisture, you have a lot of sugars. That excavator works like a champ. It works really fast. It does really well because those microbes are taking advantage of that moisture and sugar. As we extend into fall burn down and get to the later portion of fall, that's where it's key to bring in now excavator AMS. And so likely you're gonna have chemicals in the tank anyway, so you need that water conditioner, you need that non-ionic surfactant anyway. But now adding that AMS component, you know, Ed and I talk a lot about you take out the bank first. Those microbes need to fuel themselves first before they deposit the larger deposit back into the bank. So by having that AMS component, that's the fuel that's going to charge them, that's going to get them going faster and better, and take that out. They're going to be taking that out of the AMS bank rather than out of out of your residue, and then we're going to deposit a much larger portion back into the soil.
So one of the things I just talked about, sulfur being a little bit deficient the last couple of years. You know, this is great data from the University of Illinois, and Dr. Fred Below and we've done work for a lot of years. But there's one other element that I would add on, and the tissue test. This data came from a lot of the research out at the farm. We actually saw an uptick in the amount of sulfur in the treated versus untreated. So it's not only just releasing some of the basics that we automatically think about, but sulfur is the fourth element that we start to really think about pretty good volumes anymore. And the more that we can get that out there, and that incentivizes NP&S, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur are the three ones that drive her biological functions, whether it's bacteria or algae. It's the number one thing that we try and keep out of the lakes and ponds and streams for good reason. And so it's all about, that's what we use to kind of get that cooker going. And I really enjoy the product. I've been ecstatic with how it's worked.
So one thing I want to hit on just from Ed's data, I often will hear, well, I'm tillage. I conventional till, my stalks are going to break down anyway, I'm throwing them under the soil, I don't need a product like excavator. So in Ed's experience in studying this product and putting it on full tillage environments and no-till environments, you've seen value and benefits in both.
We've really, you know, looked at different tillage methods. I was kind of thinking through, you know, well, how can we maybe use the product in a less tillage operation in the future, and it worked in all operations. And that, I think the higher the tonnage of the residue, that's where it's going to even play a huge role in being able to break that down and get it going. And so I was a little bit perplexed with how evenly it worked in all cases. But this was a fall application, late application, about a November application. And so we ideally would have put that on maybe back, it would have been harvested in first part of October. Should have gotten it on earlier, would have actually saw more.
So how many of you have sold excavator in the past? Okay, so I want to change your thought process real quick on one other thing about excavator, and then we'll move on. Excavator AMS. You've likely got your residue breakdown guys already engaged in using excavator. So how do you change that message? How do you sell it to other people? I have an incredible water conditioner with a non-ionic surfactant that provides fertility release. We didn't talk about residue breakdown. We didn't drive the no-till message. We have an incredible water conditioner with a non-ionic surfactant that provides fertility. Change that message. Change that message so you can engage the next sector of growers that are going to adopt a product like excavator. So excavator AMS helps you change that message in your go-to-market strategy. So Ed, if we keep talking about excavator, we're going to run out of time here.
That's right.
So we want to move to the planter pass.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, and we've got some demonstration plants here, but biggest thing is trying to get those plants out of the ground, get that first node as long as you can. That you can walk down through the field, and that's the easiest way to determine. You don't have to dig them all. You know, I'm a little older. I really don't appreciate digging as much as I used to when I was a young pup. Now I can kind of tell you by the size, the diameter of that plant, and how long that first node is, how healthy that plant was, and how fast it grew. And you can automatically, in these, walk out, look through a trial, and you can almost identify then, well, what the ear size is going to be. And so you're focused on that because you want that early growth, you want that even germination, because that means that each of the ears is going to be much more profitable ear size. So these are 18 around. Those that did not have some seed treatments applied to them are much less. They're 14, 16 around. That's what we want. We need the zinc. We need to imbibe that zinc, and that's what these new seed treatments, that's the thing that our trial system at the research farm has really indicated, that our good old claw oil micronutrient chelates of zinc aren't able to perform as well. And that's what I saw about 5-6 years ago when we started applying zinc directly to the seed. We would actually see it outperform. So we knew automatically that that's the right direction. So that's really hopper throttle and its ability. And then you add in the enzymes and the biologicals, you've now got something that is, uncompared to anything on the market.
So incredibly important key nutrients at that planter pass. Really, zinc is one of the #1 driving factors. And so the fact that that's in your hopper throttle pail can attach to your seed, you get greater absorption, greater utilization. The reality is the only fertility available to your corn plant is what the roots can touch. So instead of spreading a 9% zinc where you're not going to capitalize on that full quart, let's make sure that we're placing that zinc in the right place. So when we think beyond zinc and what that corn plant needs, we then go to phosphorus.
So phosphorus, yeah, we've got tons of it in the soil, and that's the thing that we've always really struggled, is being able to get utilization of that. Growers around the world, that's what they all fight as well. The enzyme technology, the ether that's in some of the products, that is what starts the process of breaking down, and the phosphatase enzyme in particular, it'll start to break down that organic phosphorus, bring it into an available form. That's really the key to getting that started. And all of your high yield world record winners, they focus on phosphorus as the #1 thing when they first take their first tissue test. They want phosphorus to be in the excessive range. Otherwise, they go on to their next trial. They look for that phosphorus number. That is an indicator that plant is growing fast roots, bringing up lots of nutrition, and getting it at early stages, and then they take it from there. So by using the enzyme technology of the ether, that is setting the stage for being able to utilize the phosphorus. Zinc is necessary to bring in that root growth and get those plants going, and that's the key to getting these plants off. And we set that girth, so it's the whole yield component is all established by looking at #1 the rows around, the number of plants per acre, and then also the kernel size itself. And so we'll have chances each time, but each time this plant puts on a small rows around ear, it's not going to be able to recover as well. So we want that to be as girthy as possible, and then we have opportunities later stages to affect that kernel size and weight.
So how many of you have switched from planting corn first to planting soybeans first? That's been the message the last 5 years is, soybeans can handle cooler conditions, you'll drive soybean yield, was absolutely true. However, there's some things you can do in the corn space early on to help in those cool early conditions to also get your corn out there in those cool soils. So that's where sulfur comes into play, correct, Ed?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different directions, and I apologize, we don't have the billboards to be able to show you, but if you go to page 2, there's a little bit of a diagram, and sulfur is not only just something that the plants need and the biology needs, it's also has a lot to do with the soils and interactions. And so there's a little bit of a drawing here that brown blob in the middle, it's called CHA, is like a clay molecule, okay? And it's in the soil and it's holding all those cations, those positive charges, soil's negative charge. You're basically looking at sulfur being applied on the surface or in a band, and as it goes down, it will actually interlock, and sulfur will attract to the largest cation, which is magnesium, then calcium, and as it does that, it'll pull loose phosphorus, zinc, other elements. So that is also another way sulfur can assist, but it also assists by being able to start up that biome. And when we use sulfur in the research farm, it changes our very high yield environment of early planting to where we can plant earlier and earlier. It actually gives us some more opportunity to plant earlier and get the beans off, corn off to an early start. And we've averaged, that's the number one thing is our planting date. And the number two thing that follows right behind it is applying sulfur or not applying sulfur. The third thing that falls into play, especially in soybeans, seed treatments. Seed treatments allows it to deal with the environment, that colder, having some insecticide in that colder environment that today's beans have. And so those will take us and give us the most yield response. So sulfur is one of the keys we use to allow us to plant earlier, and we're picking up an average of about 80 bushel per acre at the research farm over so, 10 years.
Ed, when you say that, when you have studied sulfur, you have seen response from sulfur the earlier you plant.
Yes.
As we start to warm up and as we start to get into those later plantings, the sulfur response becomes much, much less in that planter application.
That's correct.
So we talk about zinc, phosphorus, sulfur, and a lot of that components being available in the hopper throttle pail or through the upshift C component. One of the results we see out in this plot is stand count. So Ed's talked about rows around. It's pretty significant in this plot, the amount of stand count difference. And so when we have that hopper throttle with that zinc and we're driving to get that plant up out of the ground earlier, we have that biostimulant in there. We're seeing a pretty significant, so I wrote on the signs out here, so when you walk to your next station, you'll be able to see some stand count differences. So we did some measurements, and there's anywhere from 1,500 difference to about 4,000 difference, depending on the side-by-side space that you're in.
So the treated plants and that 2004 crop, the number one thing that changed yields in growers' fields was population itself. So these plants, they have all the nutrition, they have everything. So they're trying to actually put on more than one a year, which is a great sign. It means you got a lot of things. But if you could increase the population, which is too late at this point, you don't know what the weather's going to be, but that was what drove those yields back in 2004. This is actually putting on in other years, and that's exactly how these plants are responding. The plants that took a little longer to get going out of the ground didn't use all that early sunshine that was they planted this about April the 5th, I think. And that is actually what allowed them to utilize that timing, is those early growth stages. And so that's why these plants are putting on 2 ears. Those are trying to just put on 1 ear and fill that one. And it's a smaller girth.
So you guys, most of you sell seed or plant seed if you don't sell it. You want your farmer to get utilization on every single kernel they put in the ground. So we can help do that by driving that emergence, driving that stand count message. Again, we're going to keep moving through the corn life cycle and how we can unlock the yield potential. And so we're going to drive into that early development stage and really looking at that V3, V4, because we want to be just prior to that ear set timing.
Right.
And so there's a couple key things you can do there. And so the one that I'll kickstart it with is driving a plant growth regulator. And so the reason I'll talk about a plant growth regulator is we talked about zinc really driving roots and establishing roots, and that is still the case at this timing. But if you use a plant growth regulator and influence cell division, we can continue to drive roots. And so that at that timing, I'm going to call it a root and shoot. We're looking for driving roots. We're looking to drive more plant mass. And so then when you pair that with more zinc, again, you're continuing to do that. So you have two methods of doing that. What I've discovered in studying plant growth regulators is you can't provide a hormone and not provide food to go with it.
Right.
So I've had lots and lots of guys try plant growth regulators, retailers come out and sell them a plant growth regulator and they don't see results. Well, why is that? Are you gonna give your kid a hormone and then lock them out of the pantry? If you're gonna drive growth, you have to sustain that growth. You have to help feed that growth. So molybdenum has become a really key component that not a lot of guys are talking about.
Right.
But this is a key stage for that.
Right. And so this moly is one of those elements that really, back in 2004, we didn't really focus on at all, really wasn't even looking at it. And we've realized now how much that is actually changing, in particular soybeans, because moly is so very important in that nodulization process. But in corn, even though it's not supposed to be a very exciting element for corn, we're seeing it actually harness the nitrogen. So that plant's manufacturing a lot of N, and it'll harness that N and moly all through the stages of that corn growth. In fact, I'm going to make a statement there that when we see the growers that are on high yield paths throughout multiple states, if they focus on two elements, boron and moly, and get those two right, in other words, high enough levels, keep it in their, maintain it in their corn crop, they'll actually outperform. Everything else comes in balance, and you'll actually see those two elements start to make a difference when we move even into the fungicide stage. You can start to see that timing will actually, if you put boron on and moly, it'll actually raise the other cations in the plant. So it's very exciting to have something. You talk about trying to save $100 an acre for a grower, small amount of moly and a small amount of boron, and it's actually helping it pull more utilization. That's crazy. That's great.
So there's two of you have the magic seat, and then we'll get to your question. Can you guys get that cup and that bottle of water? I'd like you to pour this about half full and shake it up. So Ed brought up nitrogen. It's when most guys are side dressing.
Right.
Most guys are applying nitrogen in some shape or form. We have traditional stabilizers. You heard this morning that nitrogen stabilization is going to become incredibly key in part of the regenerative ag message. However, do we want to stabilize nitrogen in a way that hurts your biology in the field? No. So I don't call this nitrogen stabilization, I call this nitrogen management. We're going to use a polymer component where we treat the nitrogen. And so we're attaching to the nitrogen that's then attaching the nitrogen to your soil colloid. So instead of stabilizing and influencing the biology in your soil, we're actually going to keep the nitrogen in that zone where your roots can reach it. Because even if you are stabilizing with a competitive product, that doesn't stop your nitrogen from landing deeper in the soil than your root system. So we're going to keep that nitrogen in that root system. We're going to keep that in a higher space in your soil profile, make more of it available. What's also great about this is we treat the nitrogen so your cost flows with the nitrogen. So one of the keys, keeping that cost low, making sure your nutrients are available. And so as these gentlemen let this little jug sit, you'll start to see it solidify. This is strictly the polymer piece. It's only one component of our nitrogen management. Just want you to see how it works. It does not do this until it reaches the soil. So do not say to me, oh my gosh, you're going to clog my sprayer, you're going to clog all my equipment, this is horrible, there's no way I'm touching that. It does this when it's in the soil. So it gives you some visual, so you guys can pass those around, of how we can better manage your nitrogen with keeping your soil health available. Sir, you had a question.
Moly that goes on preferably early.
Yeah. So you actually through the whole plant, So moly, we need to have some to start with in corn and soybeans. Soybeans in particular, early stages. But once you look at these graphs, and this is probably the easiest way to explain that, is there's a graphing of 4 elements. And so once you get to this corn at about knee high, it is actually going to take up a huge amount of N. That's what she's talking about, is that side dress N. So moly at that stage, sulfur at that stage, potassium, you know, all those elements have to go in very quickly. And that root system, the bigger it is, and moly can help assist that utilization of that N and make it much more valuable. And it makes the plants able to actually, corn plants and soybean plants are making 400 or 500 pounds of N per acre at 80 bushel soybeans. They actually need more moly just to convert that amount of N, where corn, we still need it to actually help in that production of that, moving that sugar to the ear. And that's really moly, a big part of it. It's also a colorant. If you take a corn crop that doesn't have enough moly, it'll be a light colored. You add plenty of moly, it'll almost turn it black. I mean, it's one of those elements out of the 7 that are very help with photosynthesis.
You know, we've sold moly for 15 years, but it is very, it doesn't hang around forever.
That's right. It's mobile in the soil.
Right.
And that's the kind of the neat part. It's a negative charge, just like boron is. So we can't depend on it. We have to almost figure out a way to kind of, and we only need small doses. So you're exactly, that's part of the game of growing high yield corn today, is figuring out ways to make multiple passes or multiple applications, because we cannot get that nutrient on.
Use 4 ounces, but a couple of times.
Yeah. Go.
If you were to apply it just one time,
Yeah.
say both corn and soybeans were,
So for soybeans, it'd be in that R3 stage, because that's when it's really starting to transfer a lot of the nitrogen to the plant pods. So R3, R4, somewhere in there. In a year like this where we've got lots of moisture, I'm going to say R4. In a drier year, R3. In corn, we want to probably have that back there at about a V12 stage before we get to tassel, and that's an optimum time for boron to get the max out of it, and that's really to help create those cells from leaking sugars from there on, and that's where we get the biggest responses. But both of those products, you know, this, when you've got that timing, and right now this corn crop, they tell me, I haven't walked it yet, they tell me there's no disease really out here in any. So to minimize disease, you want plenty of boron to not leak sugars between the cells. That's where the disease lives.
So I'm a firm believer in fungicide, but as I spend more time in this space and really look at plant health and feeding nutrients,
Pardon me?
you know, one thing we've discovered is you can influence yield 25% by foliar applications. And so when we talk about more bushels for less, it's how do you better use your dollars? How do you apply the right nutrients at the right time? But as we think through that, those foliar applications can then extend your grain fill period. So we want to be looking at the right nutrients at the right time. And so while I'm a believer in fungicide, the more we nutritionally take care of our plant, especially with a boron that's closing off those cell walls from sugars leaking out, inviting disease in, the less a fungicide is needed. The more fungicide becomes about the disease,
Right.
rather than everything else going on in that plant. And so your plant stays more stress-free. There's less invitation of disease in that plant when you're treating it with the right nutrition and feeding it properly. So to kind of round this out, and to me this is the most important piece other than the foundation, is you'll see in the beginning of this, we have the traditional Meristem high yield program. But on the back, here's the program if you really want to push it, here's the program if you really want to drive. And ultimately what I do is I duplicate the late season pass, and I do it twice. And so not only do we hit that boron component that shores up those cell walls, so think of it as a superhighway. You've made your superhighway. Now we're going to apply Revline late season, so a plant growth regulator. Again, I told you those root and shoot plant growth regulators, that's a majority of what's on the market. We want different hormones. We want to switch gears. We don't want that plant to focus on root and shoots. We want to focus on chlorophyll creation, sunlight utilization, and sugar movement. So we want to flip this switch. We want to trigger getting those sugars to move through that superhighway, getting those nutrients to move through that superhighway so we can have a greater grain fill. Higher test weight, greater grain fill. So when I think about driving extremely high yield, the best time to do any of these things is before tassel. We traditionally do fungicide at tassel or slightly after. Start to drive that earlier. Start to drive as you're going in, preload, going into reproductive stages, but then come back and manage again. And so doing that potassium and boron, and so I know Ed talked about boron, but with nutrients, there's pairings. You have to pair. The zinc and phosphorus pair together. You need them both to truly work together in the plant. Potassium and boron work together. And so in that NKBS, that's where we're driving that potassium and boron. And one thing about boron, every farmer likes to try something new. Boron's been a message for several years. Hey, I went out, I bought some 10% boron. I didn't see anything. You're right, sir, you didn't. It dried on your leaf, it crystallized in on your leaf, it never got in the plant. Or you got in the leaf tissue, but you didn't get that mobile. Using the right boron, using the right technology to drive that in that plant matters. So yes, we will not be the cheapest product on the market. We will be the most impactful product on the market.
Yeah, you've got one of the, in both of the boron products that Meristem carries, you've got the best boron technology with the cross-linking that doesn't allow it to stop in the leaf pectins. It actually moves right through and moves, and that's all been found by the guy out in Davis, UC Davis, and he is one of the premier professors. And that cross-linking technology is one of a kind. It's actually changed the boron and its ability to be utilized. The faster we can get that boron moving through the plant, going to the new growth, that's what's changing that product. So you've got something that's premier, as good as it is.
What's the average grain fill period you guys experience? I usually say about 55 days. So if we can keep that plant healthy, if we can extend that grain fill period, so if you can take that 55 days and turn it into 65 days. You know, with the wildfires last year, we saw that. We saw cooler conditions, we saw extended grain fill, guys that didn't even do a lot didn't take care of their plants, still saw an extended grain fill period. The longest grain fill period that I've experienced is 75 days. And that's through influencing the plant. And so if you can extend your grain fill, think about taking 55 days to 75 days. What if there's a hot weather event in there? You've extended your time to recover from that. You've extended your time to continue to fill. And so that's a key thought. One thing we skipped over that I'd be remiss if we didn't circle back around to that early pass. Corn rootworm. Yeah.
So that early pass, the rootworm issues were really devastating back in the 2004-2005 year. Now we've got a lot of traits, but we still have hot spots. And so today we've got this ability to put a rootworm product in the
hopper throttle pail, in the biocapsule.
And I actually tested that product about 5 to 6 years ago out at the research farm. And I tried to put it on a spot where we had raised pumpkins. And I remember physically where every row was, and I was trying to find a place because we had kind of pushed rootworm beetles out of our whole research farm through some management techniques. And so I planted it there, and we did a lot of trials back and forth with treated and untreated with that first technology. And that that actually worked out to we were getting 3 to 6 more bushel without any rootworm. That was amazing to me. You could see it in the plants. They were actually changing. And so we had a lot of the professors out that had designed that product. And so now you guys, I come along here, well, how many years, 4, 5, 6 years later, you got it in a pail available. And I would be, you know, if I was in a rootworm spot, you get up around Champaign, Illinois, they got rootworms that eat right through every trait, eat through every insecticide. They're having a hard time, and I would be looking at layering that in with my product. So
What's
there
nice
are going to be hot spots around the world.
It repels the rootworm.
Right, they are confused.
So it's not. It doesn't have to take a bite like it has to of your traits. So it's repelling. So in my mind, it's insecticide replacement.
Yeah.
So when you have rootworm, this is your alternative to that insecticide.
It's like some of these insecticides now for trying to repel them off your skin, where they're just basically taking away the CO2 that they're traced to. That's kind of the same concept. This doesn't allow the worm to actually find the root. That is fantastic. That's why we picked up a little bit more yield component out of that corn back 5 years ago.
Were you guys trialing it without any insecticide?
Yeah, we haven't worked at the research farm. We haven't put insecticide, or we've actually gone away from most traits. Some hybrids that we would get, you know, that they'd bring in have a trait. They usually don't perform as well as the double pros or a conventional. But but where we were using some of this, we were actually seeing an uptick.
So if you have high rootworm pressure, this is something to do in addition to your stacked corn.
Yeah.
If you have very low rootworm pressure, but it's there, now you can go to a lower trait platform and use this as a tool to help in that rootworm space. And so it gives you a little bit of flexibility depending on your rootworm pressure.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
We're all center pivot irrigated where I'm at. Center pivot. We spoon feed all the way to tassel. What's your recommendation for getting this stuff? Can we put it in through the pivot? Does it need to be sprayed on?
Oh, to be able to go through the soil?
So he's got a center pivot. They spoon feed all year long. And so he wants to know, is it better to be sprayed on or can it go through the pivot?
Boy, I haven't tested it. I guess I don't know. In regards to the nitrogen stabilizer?
No, in regards to the foliars.
Oh, the foliar. That was a biological that, you know, was growing, so I would think you would have to probably put it on early.
The corn rootworm piece, but he's talking about the whole system.
Yeah, I'm talking the boron.
The foliars.
Oh, yeah. So you can use them foliar, you just need to make a fast pass. As long as you're making fast passes like you would a fungicide or something like that, they work fine. They work perfect. We've got a bunch of trials just west of Plains at one of the river bottoms with some growers.
Can you do that at the same time you're putting fertilizer?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So Upshift C is going through a lot of pivots right now.
Yeah.
So Upshift C is getting
Right.
liquefied and then put through a lot of pivots.
Yeah.
So.
That was what it was originally designed for, was to be put through drip tape and irrigation.
Correct.
Yeah, because it's built to be able to not allow for calcium and whatnot to build up out of the water into those drip lines. It actually cleans those out, so it's designed very wisely for irrigation.
So the air horms beat. We're sorry we kept you too long.